Let me tell you about someone truly remarkable.
The earth was still soft from winter's thaw, and the fog clung to the grave like a shroud. I held the folded letter in my hands, its edges worn, knowing it would arrive too late. Somewhere, a truth waited, buried deeper than the soil beneath my son. I had spent years raising my son in the quiet of our countryside home, the world outside moving too fast to notice our small joys. Life had taught me patience, but grief has a way of unraveling even the strongest hearts. The story begins on a cold morning, with a letter from his mother finally making its way to me. Only I had already made choices that could never be undone. The fog was thicker than usual that morning. It clung to the trees like a damp blanket, curling around the trunks and drifting lazily over the fields. My boots pressed into the softened earth, and I could feel the chill creeping through the soles, threading up my legs, settling in my bones. The house behind me was quiet. The shutters rattled faintly in the wind, and for a moment, I thought I heard the floorboards whispering secrets I wasn't meant to know. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, the fabric rough and familiar, grounding me against the damp and cold. A crow called somewhere in the distance. Its voice sliced through the silence, sharp and sudden, and I flinched. I always flinch at that sound. It reminds me of how easily life can be taken, how quickly a morning like this can turn into the last day I see someone. I moved slowly to the mailbox at the edge of the gravel driveway. The mist made the world soft, uncertain. Shapes blurred together, and for a second, I wasn't sure if I'd stepped into the day or some dream I'd been having for years. The envelope was there, tucked neatly inside the box, its edges curling with age. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust, the kind of scent that pulls memories out of you before you even know what you're remembering. I held it for a long moment. My hands ached from yesterday's chores, lifting, digging, scrubbing, but it wasn't that pain that made me hesitate. It was the weight in my chest. That unnamed weight that has been there for years, sitting heavy over my heart. I breathed in slowly. The damp air filled my lungs, and I let it out with a sigh that I didn't know I was holding. The fog seemed to pulse around me, and for a moment I felt suspended, neither here nor there, caught between the warmth of the house and the cold of the earth. The envelope was small, plain, unassuming. And yet, it carried a gravity I couldn't explain. I traced the edges with a finger, hesitating before pulling it out. My thumb brushed the flap, and I felt a tremor run through my hand. I stepped back onto the gravel, boots crunching softly. The world was muted in the fog, the fields stretching like a gray ocean around me. I could smell the wet leaves, the moss clinging to the fence posts, the earth that had been turned over just days ago. Everything smelled alive, and yet everything felt paused, as though holding its breath. I opened the envelope slowly. The paper inside was folded neatly, creased from travel. My name was written on the front, the letters familiar yet distant, as if someone else had touched them. I unfolded the letter and held it close. The words didn't leap off the page immediately. I had to let my eyes adjust, let my mind catch up. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, not hurried, not angry. There was a patience in it, a stillness that made the early morning feel even colder. I stepped back from the mailbox, reading the first line aloud, softly to myself. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like echoes in the fog. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected her voice here, now, after so many years. The fog shifted, brushing against my cheeks. I could hear the faint rustle of branches, leaves settling under the weight of moisture. The sound reminded me of quiet moments from long ago, when life had seemed simpler, when the weight in my chest hadn't been so relentless. I pressed the letter to my lips for a moment. I didn't kiss it, not exactly. It was more like trying to drink in the scent of a memory I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. My eyes stung with the cold and something else, a warmth that had no place in this gray morning. Second crow called, closer this time. Its voice resonated differently, echoing off the fog, and I felt the familiar prickling at the back of my neck. Life is fragile, I thought again. I repeated it aloud. Life is fragile. I stepped back toward the house, boots sinking into the damp earth, the letter clutched against my chest. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, a low sound that reminded me I wasn't alone, even if I felt like it. The door was cold against my hand as I pushed it open, and the warmth of the house hit me suddenly, stark against the chill outside. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread before me like a map I didn't know how to read. The morning light filtered through the curtains, thin and hesitant. Shadows played across the pages, moving with the wind outside. I traced the lines with my finger again. The words were simple, ordinary almost, and yet they carried the weight of years. I thought of him then, my son, though he was asleep in his room, unaware of the letter waiting for me, unaware of the small tremor running through my chest. The letter might change everything, or it might simply confirm a fear I'd been carrying quietly, in the spaces between chores, between laughter and silence, between morning and night. I folded the letter gently and held it in both hands. The paper was warm from my touch, and I could feel my own heartbeat in my fingers. The fog outside hadn't lifted. It swirled around the house, curling against the windows, brushing past the eaves. It felt alive, like the morning itself was watching me, waiting for me to make a choice I didn't yet understand. I closed my eyes for a moment. The ache in my hands, the weight in my chest, the tremor in my knees. All of it seemed connected. I felt the fragile pulse of life around me, the quiet insistence of the world to keep moving forward even when we cannot. Finally, I opened my eyes. The letter rested there on the table. I could hear the distant sound of the crow again, fading now, retreating into the fog. The world outside was still muted, still gray, still holding its breath. And I realized I was holding mine too. What secret does it hold? I whispered the question to the empty room, and the fog seemed to answer with silence. I didn't yet know if I was ready to hear the answer. I tucked the letter close, tracing the edges once more, and felt the weight shift slightly in my chest. Not gone, not eased, but different. Something was coming. Something I had to face. And for the first time that morning, I felt a flicker of anticipation under the heaviness of it all. The morning fog pressed against the windows. I pressed my hand to the glass, feeling the chill, the damp, the quiet heartbeat of the world. The letter was mine now, its secrets waiting. And somewhere deep inside I knew that nothing, not the frost, not the crow, not the ache in my hands, would ever feel the same again. The table was cold beneath my hands, the wood worn smooth by years of meals, letters, and quiet moments. I traced the grain with my fingertips, as if touching the history embedded there could steady the tremor in my chest. The envelope lay in front of me, folded neatly, its edges soft from travel. I lifted it slowly, turned it over, and felt the familiar weight of anticipation. The paper inside was thick, almost velvety, its texture heavy in my hands. The handwriting was delicate, looping, careful, the kind of handwriting that carries a presence, a personality, a voice. And for a moment the room disappeared. I was back in the kitchen of that old apartment, the one with the cracked linoleum floor, the one where we had argued until our voices shook the walls. I remembered her smile, the way it had lit the room even in winter, even when we were both angry. I remembered the argument that followed, sharp words thrown like stones, and the silence that lingered long after. The choice I had made, to keep him here, to hold him close while she remained away, had seemed necessary then, protective. But now, holding this letter, I wasn't sure if it had been courage or cowardice. I unfolded the paper carefully, hesitating as the first crease whispered against my fingers. The letter smelled faintly of paper and ink, of long travel and storage, of patience. It was as if the scent itself was trying to speak to me, to remind me of the time lost, the choices made, the life that had slipped quietly past. Her words began slowly, deliberate. Each line seemed to pulse, as though aware of my hesitation. I read the first few sentences aloud, softly, my voice trembling without sound. I've carried this with me for years. I never wanted it to arrive too late. But you need to know. The ellipsis felt like an invitation and a warning at the same time. The room seemed to shrink around me. The walls pressed closer. The kettle on the stove was silent, though I imagined it whistling. The chair beneath me creaked faintly, as if remembering all the times I had sat here, waiting, worrying, regretting. My fingers lingered on the folds of the paper, unwilling to release it, unwilling to read too quickly. I remembered the small details, the way she used to tap her pen against the table when thinking, the quiet sighs she gave when the world was too loud, the softness of her hands when they brushed against mine. Those memories pressed against my chest, a mix of warmth and ache. Each word in the letter carried them, resurrected in ink and paper, and yet there was something more, something urgent beneath the calm. I paused, letting the silence fill the space around me. The floorboards creaked faintly under the weight of my thoughts. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, rattling them lightly, like a reminder that time moves on, whether we are ready or not. My heartbeat seemed louder than usual, each thump marking the rhythm of a past that could no longer be undone. The letter went on. She spoke of regret, of fear, of decisions made in moments too swift to measure properly. She spoke of love, the kind that waits quietly in the shadows, never asking for permission, never seeking acknowledgement. I could hear it in the curve of her letters, in the pauses she had left between lines, like breaths she didn't want to rush. My hand shook slightly, not from anger, not from surprise, but from the weight of realization. The past I had protected so carefully, the choice I had thought final, could now be touched, could now be understood in ways I had never imagined. Each word felt alive, pressing against my fingers, pressing against the careful walls I had built around my grief. I remembered him, my son, and the mornings we had shared. The small breakfasts, the stories told over toast, the way his laughter filled the room and softened the edges of my solitude. She had written to him too, though he would not read it yet. The thought made the ache sharper. How much could a single piece of paper hold? How much weight could a folded letter carry across years and distance? I ran my thumb over a word, letting it linger. The ink was slightly raised, almost tangible, and in that texture I found memory, longing, and the ache of choices that cannot be erased. I thought of all the nights I had lain awake, replaying the argument, imagining the what-ifs, the paths not taken. And now, in the quiet morning with the letter open before me, those nights felt closer, pressing their way into the present. I spoke her name softly, just a whisper. The walls didn't answer. The wind didn't answer. Only the letter remained, patient and honest, waiting for me to listen. And I did. I listened to the spaces between her words, to the silences, the pauses, the hesitations. It was there I found the truth. Not the accusations, not the blame, but the understanding that had taken years to reach. The room seemed to exhale with me, letting the air settle, letting the tension ease into a quiet rhythm. I folded the letter back slowly, not hurried, not careless. I placed it beside me on the table, feeling its presence like a living thing, pressing lightly against my arm, reminding me that the past can never be fully controlled, only acknowledged. I thought about tomorrow, about the choices I would make next, about the son who had grown between us, carrying fragments of both of us in his heart. Could a letter undo the past I had tried so hard to protect? Could it heal, or merely illuminate the fractures that had always been there? I didn't know yet. Outside, a single bird called, its voice distant and lonely. I watched a shadow pass over the curtain, soft and slow, and felt the room settle into its own quiet. The letter waited beside me, patient and alive, like a secret finally ready to speak. I placed my hands over it, resting my forehead lightly against the wood of the table. For a moment everything was still. And in that stillness I realized, the past was no longer only mine to hold. It had begun its quiet journey toward understanding, and I could no longer step away. The morning stretched before me, gray and soft. I took a breath, deep and deliberate, letting the letter's weight sink in. One choice had ended years of quiet, and now another waited. The folded paper rested like a heartbeat on the table, and I knew, whatever came next, it would change everything. The garden was quiet, wrapped in frost. Every blade of grass glistened like fragile glass, catching what little light the winter morning offered. The world outside was muted, gray, and still, as if the earth itself had paused to hold its breath. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, the fabric rough against my skin, and stepped carefully across the frozen ground. I thought of him then, my son. The way he laughed, so bright it could pierce through the coldest morning. The little hands I once held, now only a memory pressing against my chest. My breath came in shallow clouds, and I tried to make each one last, as if drawing them out could draw him back to me, even for a moment. The frost creaked beneath my boots. The wind moved lazily through the bare branches, brushing against the window panes and rattling the shutters. I shivered, but not entirely from cold. There was a weight here, heavier than winter air. Regret, I realized, pressing against me in the same way the frost presses into the soil. Relentless, consuming, unyielding. Weeks ago I had made a choice. A decision that had seemed necessary then. I had buried him in a place hidden from the world. Hidden from eyes that might judge, eyes that might ask questions I couldn't answer. At the time I thought it was protection. Now, as the gray light sifted through the fog, I wondered if it had been anything but punishment. The snow whispered against the eaves, tiny flakes landing like whispered confessions. I imagined his laughter carried in that wind, brittle and soft, touching the frost-dusted garden where I stood. My hands ached to hold him again, but the earth held him more firmly than I ever could. I knelt, letting my fingertips trace the frozen ground. The frost bit gently, the cold nibbling at my skin, and in that sting I felt a sharp clarity. Each decision I had made, every moment I had chosen to act alone, had led me here, to this quiet garden, to this frozen shadow of loss. Could love and grief ever feel so entwined? The trees around me were bare, skeletal against the gray sky. I imagined the way he might have run between them, tiny feet stirring leaves and laughter alike. I closed my eyes, letting the cold air fill my lungs, and I could almost hear it, the soft rustle of movement, the echoes of small joy in a space long since emptied. I remembered the day I had buried him. The soil had been soft, damp from winter rain. My hands had sunk into it, gripping the spade with more force than I knew I had. The quiet had been suffocating, broken only by the occasional crow, the distant sound of a church bell, a dog barking far away. I thought then that I was doing the right thing, protecting him, keeping him safe from a world that could never understand. But now, as frost laced the garden and gray light settled over the house, the memory felt heavier. The choice I had made seemed almost cruel in its certainty. Had I acted out of love or out of my own fear? The line between them had blurred, and I could feel it pressing against my ribs like a weight I could not lift. I rose slowly, boots crunching against the frozen grass. The air smelled faintly of pine, of damp earth, of winter itself. Every breath felt sharp, alive, a reminder that I was still here, still moving through a world that my son would never touch again. I pressed my palms against the cold wooden railing of the porch, feeling the rough grain beneath my fingers, grounding myself in what remained. The shadow of the house stretched across the yard, long and quiet. I traced its edges with my gaze, seeing not just the structure, but the moments it held, the small breakfasts, the laughter, the arguments, the nights spent in quiet reflection. And now, the shadow carried him too, the weight of what was gone, what could not be returned. I thought of the letter I had received, folded paper resting on the table inside, waiting for me. Its presence was subtle but insistent, a reminder that the past and present were colliding in ways I could no longer ignore. Each word written in that careful handwriting was a reminder of love, loss, and decisions that could not be undone. A crow called again, its voice distant, slicing through the muted morning. I shivered, pulling my cardigan tighter. The sound reminded me of fragility, how easily life could be taken, how quickly a winter morning could become a lifetime of regret. I closed my eyes, letting the sound fade into the gray, letting it carry away a fraction of the ache in my chest. I knelt again, this time letting the frost press against my palms. The sensation was sharp, almost painful, but it grounded me in the moment. I thought about his hands, so small, so full of life once. And I thought about mine, now carrying the memory, the choice, the weight of an absence that could never be replaced. The sun tried to break through the clouds, a pale hint of light that barely touched the frost. It cast long shadows across the garden, each one fragile and trembling. I imagined his shadow among them, a whisper of what had been, mingling with the quiet world I still inhabited. Could a shadow ever hold a memory so real it ached in the bones? I didn't know. I stood finally, boots pressing into the frozen earth, and let the cold wind wrap around me. It was sharp, honest, a reminder that the world moved forward even when I could not. I imagined the garden in spring, thawing, life returning slowly. And I wondered if grief, too, could thaw in time, if the frost on my heart could ever lift. The house behind me seemed to breathe softly, the floorboards creaking faintly as if remembering every step I had taken, every choice I had made. I placed my hand on the railing one last time, feeling its rough warmth, the solidity of what remained. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, letting the cold fill me, the frost-laced air pressing against my skin, my lungs, my heart. And in that breath, I felt the weight of my choice, the shadow of my son, the quiet insistence of life that moves on, no matter how frozen it seems. I stepped back toward the house, leaving the garden and its frost behind, but carrying its shadow within me. The winter air clung to my coat, the world muted and gray. And I realized the past I had buried was not gone. It waited, patient, silent, shaping the moments yet to come. The frost glimmered faintly in the fading light, and I knew the shadow would follow me into the house, into the letter, into the choices I would soon have to face. Could I ever forgive myself? Could the weight of winter finally lift? I did not know. But I could feel that the answer, whatever it was waiting. The rain tapped lightly against the window pane, a soft rhythm that felt like it was meant for me alone. Inside, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that listens to your thoughts and lets them echo. I sat at the table, the letter still open in front of me, and for a moment I could hear her voice, clear as if she were standing in the room. Came unbidden. Her voice trembling, pleading. The night of the phone call, her words breaking through the line. Please. Just a little more time. I can fix this. The way she had cried, a sound that had lodged itself in my chest and refused to leave. I pressed my palms to my face, and the echoes of that moment pressed back. I remembered the last moments before the accident. The sun had been low in the sky, gold spilling across the porch, and he had laughed, unaware of how fleeting life could be. I saw myself standing there, frozen, unable to reach out, to change the path that fate had already begun to carve. My chest tightened at the memory. Could I have done something different? Should I have? The letter reminded me of everything I had chosen not to say, every apology swallowed and tucked away. Paths not taken sprawled before me in inked words, like roads disappearing into fog. The realization pressed down, heavy and insistent, that life's cruelty often hides in the silence between decisions. I touched the paper lightly. Her handwriting felt like a pulse beneath my fingertips. It carried warmth, regret, love, and sorrow, all interwoven, delicate and unyielding. I wondered if she had written it knowing it might never reach him, knowing the choices I had made. Could she forgive me? Could I forgive myself? The memory of her on the phone returned. I could see her sitting on the edge of her bed, hair damp from her tears, shoulders trembling, hands clutching the receiver like it could anchor her to reality. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she had said, voice breaking. I had wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that blame belonged nowhere but to chance, but the words wouldn't come. I had only listened, silent, letting the line hold the tension between us. Outside, the rain drew little rivers along the roof, tracing paths that seemed like tears from the sky. I traced a line on the table with my finger, following its movement, imagining that somehow it could lead me back to understanding, back to her, back to him. But the distance between us was measured not in miles, but in choices, in the moments when hesitation had ruled and action had failed. I remembered holding him afterward, the stillness of his small body, and the sharp, unrelenting ache that followed. How fragile life could be, I thought again. How swiftly it could be taken. How quietly grief could settle into every corner of a home. Her voice haunted me still, in the spaces between the rain, in the corners of rooms where shadows lingered, in the silence that swallowed everything else. The letter beckoned again, and I read more slowly this time. Each sentence unfolded like a doorway I hadn't been ready to open. She wrote of mistakes, of fear, of love that refused to be quiet, of regret that had lingered for years. I felt the edges of the paper, the slight rise of ink, and in it, a rhythm, the rhythm of life, loss, and the impossibility of rewriting the past. I stood and moved to the window, looking out at the garden, gray and wet, frost melting in the drizzle. Each droplet seemed to carry memory. Each puddle reflected what had been lost and what could never return. I imagined her looking out a window of her own, wondering if I would ever understand, if I would ever forgive if she could. I heard a creak behind me and turned. The house seemed alive with its own memory. Floorboards remembering steps, walls remembering laughter, silence remembering sorrow. I sank into the chair again, the rain a soft accompaniment to my thoughts. I could see the past and the present layered over each other, and the letter bridged them with delicate certainty. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall quietly. They were not loud, not dramatic, just small rivers that marked the ache I carried. I remembered her face, the way she had pleaded, the sharp edges of desperation softened only by love. Could she ever understand the weight of my decision? Could I ever make her understand? The room smelled faintly of old wood and paper, and I breathed it in, letting the familiar scent ground me. I traced the words with my finger again, slowly, deliberately, as if memorizing each curve could offer insight, could bring clarity. But clarity did not come. Only the slow, steady knowledge that the past had returned, insistent and patient, demanding attention. I remembered the arguments that had preceded that night, the harsh tones and unspoken fears. I had been stubborn, so certain of my choices, so unwilling to see what she saw. And now, as I traced her handwriting, I understood that stubbornness had been both a shield and a prison. Her voice had never left me. It had only been waiting for a moment like this, to remind me of everything I had not said. The rain eased slightly, a soft mist now that blurred the world outside. Shadows pressed gently against the edges of the room, folding memory and present together. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the table, letting the ache settle. The letter was no longer just paper. It was a living thing, carrying remorse, love, and questions I could not yet answer. I whispered her name. It felt small in my mouth, inadequate for the weight it carried. Could she forgive me? Could I forgive her, myself, the world that had moved us to this point? The questions hung in the misted air, unanswered, insistent. The phone sat silently on the counter, a mute witness to the past and its echoes. I imagined her voice reaching through the lines, across time and distance, soft and tremulous, and I realized that some calls never really end. They linger, carried on memory and longing, and find their way back when we are ready to listen. I folded the letter slowly, careful not to crease it further. I placed it on the table, feeling the weight of what it contained settle into the surface, pressing gently, reminding me that the past was never truly gone. Wait, patient, quiet, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for understanding. Outside, the rain began to fall more steadily again, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I sat in silence, letting it fill the spaces where words had failed me. The past had returned, unbidden and undeniable. And in that return I sensed that something was shifting. Not resolution, not yet, but the first step toward something that could heal. I stood, stretching stiff limbs, and moved toward the window. The garden, blurred by rain, seemed softer, forgiving even. I pressed my hand to the glass, letting the cold touch my palm, a quiet reminder that the world continued to turn, carrying grief, memory, and the fragile hope of understanding. The letter remained on the table, patient, waiting, and I realized that no matter what had been said, no matter what had been left unsaid, its presence demanded one thing: that I face the past not just in memory, but in the choices I would make from this day forward. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every creak feel louder, every draft sharper. I stepped across the worn wooden floor, the boards groaning faintly beneath my weight, as if remembering footsteps that no longer existed. The room stretched before me, hollow and still, and I felt the absence of him like a shadow brushing my shoulders. I ran my fingers over his favorite chair, the one with the frayed cushion and the indentation shaped by years of sitting. I pressed my palm into the curve where he had rested his small back, imagining him there now, smiling, unaware of the world's fragility. Even in his absence, the chair carried him, a memory pressed into fabric and foam. The toys were scattered across the floor, half-forgotten remnants of childhood. A wooden train sat on the rug, wheels dusty, tracks incomplete. I picked it up, turning it slowly in my hands, feeling the weight of every hour we had spent together, every laugh, every small argument over sharing or fairness. I set it back gently, afraid to disturb the silence, afraid to disturb him. The house seemed alive with memory. The walls whispered the things I could not say aloud. I could hear the echoes of bedtime stories, the soft laughter drifting from the kitchen, the gentle scolding over spilled milk or a missed chore. Every creak, every draft, every shadow felt like a voice reminding me of what had been, what I had lost, and what I had tried to protect. The wind rattled the shutters outside, a hollow, urgent sound like a warning. I pressed my hand to the cold glass, letting the chill seep into my palm, grounding me in the present even as my mind drifted to the past. Could a house feel sorrow? Could it hold memory in the way a body holds pain? I wondered silently, as the rain tapped lightly against the panes. I walked slowly from room to room, pausing at the doorway to the bedroom he had once shared. The bed was made neatly, the sheets pressed flat, but I could see the space where he had rolled, kicked, and sprawled in sleep. I ran my fingers across the blankets, feeling the contours of memory pressed into the fabric. Even in silence, the room spoke, of life lived, of innocence lost, of grief that had no proper shape. The letter sat on the kitchen table, folded carefully, waiting. Its presence was quiet, insistent, a reminder that the past had returned. I approached it slowly, each step measured, feeling the weight of what it carried. My hands hovered over it, uncertain, afraid. How can I face the truth hidden within? How can I unravel words that could undo years of careful protection, years of denial? I picked up the letter finally, feeling its texture, the faint indentation of pen against paper. The handwriting seemed alive beneath my fingers, deliberate, insistent. I traced the curves of the letters, memorizing the rhythm, the flow, as though knowing it by touch could make the message gentler, more bearable. But the words pressed back, sharp and unyielding. I thought of him again, of his small voice, the way he had asked questions I couldn't answer, the way his laughter had filled the house until the walls themselves seemed to smile. Now, the silence was a mirror, reflecting what I had lost, reflecting the distance that had grown between the past and the present. I could hear it in the floorboards, the wind, the creak of doors, the house breathing in memory. I sat at the table, the letter before me, hands resting lightly on the wood. The room smelled faintly of old furniture and dust, of evenings spent reading and telling stories, of meals shared and sometimes forgotten. I traced the folds of the paper, feeling the pulse of the past beneath my fingertips. Could I forgive myself? Could I forgive her? Could we ever reconcile the life he had lost with the choices we had made? The shadows shifted as the day lightened, stretching across the floor in long, thin shapes. They seemed to reach toward me, touching my hands, my arms, my shoulders, reminding me of every moment I had tried to hold close, every quiet hour spent wishing I could turn back time. I pressed my forehead against my hands, letting the warmth settle, letting the weight of memory sink into my bones. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the shutters again, insistent and hollow. I imagined it as a voice, calling me to face the truth, to confront what I had avoided, to let the letter speak fully. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me, letting it shake loose the hesitation lodged in my chest. I opened the letter slowly, as though opening it too quickly might shatter me. The words were deliberate, gentle, and yet they cut through the quiet house like a bell in the fog. She had written of regret, of apologies never spoken, of love that had waited silently for acknowledgement. Each line carried weight, each pause a reminder of what could not be undone. I read and reread, tracing the curves of each word with my fingertip, letting them sink in. I could feel her presence in the handwriting, her breath in the pauses, her voice in the spaces between letters. The house seemed to lean closer, listening, sharing its own memory of the past, pressing the silence against me until I could not escape the gravity of it. I thought of the nights we had spent together, small dinners, bedtime stories, laughter and scolding, and how all of it now existed in shadow, echoing through these walls. Could a house mourn? Could it remember? I felt as if it did, in the sigh of floorboards, the hush of curtains, the creak of hinges. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table, pressing my palms against the wood. The house was still, but it felt alive, full of memory, of voices that were no longer here. I walked slowly through the rooms one last time, touching the edges of what remained. His chair, the toys, the bed, the shadows in the corners, and letting them speak for the words I could not yet say. The wind rattled the shutters once more, urgent, insistent. I pressed my hand against the cold glass again, feeling the chill, feeling the weight of everything the letter contained, everything the house remembered, everything I had held inside. Could I face what was written? Could I accept it without breaking? I did not know. I stepped back from the window and sat again at the table. The letter lay before me, patient, quiet, demanding attention. Outside, the wind slowed slightly, leaving only the soft tap of rain against the glass. The house seemed to exhale with me, settling into its own rhythm of memory and silence. I rested my hands on the table, letting the quiet press against me. The past had returned, unbidden and alive, whispering through walls, shadows, and the fragile objects left behind. I knew, finally, that I could no longer avoid it. The letter, the memories, the silence, they would guide me forward. The house remained still, patient, holding its breath as I did the same. And in that quiet, I realized, the truth waits in silence, waiting for hands brave enough to hold it, waiting for hearts willing to listen. The drawer creaked softly as I opened it, a sound that seemed louder than it should in the quiet of the afternoon. Dust motes floated lazily in the streaks of sunlight slicing through the half-closed blinds. My hand paused, hovering above a stack of papers, letters, and trinkets collected over years. Something caught my eye, tucked in the corner like it had been waiting for me all along. I drew it out slowly. An old photograph, edges frayed, curling slightly with age. The image was vivid despite the years. Him, small and bright-eyed, cradled in her arms. I could almost hear his giggle, see the tilt of his head, the way she had smiled at him. The same smile I had remembered 1,000 times, and yet now seemed impossibly distant. My chest tightened, a sharp ache I could not shake. The photograph pressed a memory into me, forcing me to relive every choice, every moment that had led us to this emptiness. I ran my fingers along the faded border, feeling the roughness of paper and the smoothness of memory. Every laugh, every quarrel, every whispered bedtime story surged back, overwhelming in its quiet insistence. I placed the photograph on the table, just beside the letter. Together, they were a bridge between past and present, a reminder of what had been lost and what could never return. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of both objects press against me, knowing that my grief was not a simple thing. It was alive, crawling through the rooms, pressing against my consciousness, reminding me with every heartbeat that nothing could undo the past. The room smelled faintly of old paper and worn wood. Sunlight fell unevenly across the table, highlighting the photo, the letter, and the fine dust that had settled there over years of quiet neglect. I traced the edges of the photograph again, feeling the contours of memory, the pulse of things I could never reclaim. Could a piece of paper hold love so tangible it hurt? Apparently, yes. I thought of her, holding him that day, unaware of the choices that would follow, unaware that he would soon be gone from her arms. The ache deepened, a quiet pressure that made every breath deliberate. I closed my eyes and let myself remember the way she had cradled him, How gentle, how careful, how fleeting it had all been. I picked up the photograph again, holding it near my chest. My hands shook slightly, a tremor I couldn't name. Grief, regret, love, fear. They all coiled together, pressing down on me like winter frost, cold and unrelenting. I wondered if the letter would offer solace, a path through this weight, or if it would deepen the ache that already consumed every corner of the house, every shadowed wall, every quiet room. The wind rattled the shutters outside, whispering against the edges of the window. I imagined it carrying his laughter, small and sharp, twisting through the branches of the trees, pressing against the house, reminding me that life and memory often coexist in strange, cruel harmony. I could almost hear her voice in that wind, quiet, tremulous, asking questions I could not answer. I traced the ink on the letter with a fingertip, feeling the deliberate loops and curves. They were comforting in a strange way, a reminder that someone had tried to speak, had tried to reach across the distance, had tried to repair the frayed edges of our lives with nothing but words. Could words, in the end, be enough? I doubted it, yet I held on, hoping for something. A spark, a bridge, a glimpse of understanding. I remembered the afternoons we had spent here together. All of us, laughter filling the corners, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, small hands reaching for warmth and comfort. Now, those same rooms seemed heavy with memory, thick with shadows, each object holding a fragment of the life we had once known. I could see him in the corner of my mind, a ghost pressing through light and time, reminding me of every decision, every choice, every moment I could not undo. I set the photograph back down gently, but my eyes lingered. I thought of her holding him, of the smiles that had once filled this room, of the arguments that had seemed so significant then. Each memory cut through me like sunlight through frost, bright, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Could I face these memories without breaking? I didn't know, but I had to try. The letter called to me again, patient, insistent. I reached for it slowly, letting the photograph slide to the side as if it needed to rest. My fingers brushed the paper, and I could feel her presence in every stroke, in every carefully chosen word. I began to read, letting her voice rise in my mind, low, gentle, carrying the weight of years and sorrow, of love and regret intertwined. The room felt smaller somehow, the shadows pressing closer, the dust catching in the corners like tiny reminders of time passing. I read on, letting each word settle, each sentence press against the ache in my chest, each line a bridge to something I had avoided for too long. Could the letter repair what time and choice had fractured? Perhaps not entirely, but it was a beginning. I leaned back in my chair, holding the letter loosely, staring at the photograph across the table. They were linked now in my mind. The past and present, grief and love, loss and memory. The air felt thick, heavy, yet strangely comforting, as if the house itself had drawn a blanket around me, holding me in the tension between memory and acceptance. The wind shifted again outside, soft now, carrying the faint scent of winter rain and damp earth. I pressed my hand to the table, fingertips brushing the photograph and the letter at once, trying to hold them both, trying to hold the past without letting it destroy the present. I closed my eyes and let a single tear fall, warm against the cold wood of the table. The grief was alive, but so was the memory of love, of care, of moments so fleeting they could only be held in stillness. Could I carry both? Could I accept that loss and love existed together, intertwined, unbroken by time? I didn't know. I opened my eyes and took a slow, deliberate breath. The photograph remained there, frayed edges curling like a memory reaching out. The letter lay beside it, patient and insistent. I realized that the past would not be buried completely, not if I kept these pieces close. And in that quiet, I felt the first small step toward understanding, toward holding grief and memory in the same space, without being consumed entirely by either. I rose, carefully placing the photograph back in the drawer where I had found it, leaving the letter on the table. The house seemed to exhale with me, a soft, quiet rhythm of acceptance, of memory, of something that might one day feel like peace. The wind whispered through the shutters one last time, gentle now, carrying a trace of his laughter, a trace of her voice, a reminder that the past was never fully gone. It waited patiently, but it also guided, and I knew, in its quiet insistence, that I had to follow. The road was narrow, bordered by frost-tipped grass and the skeletal remains of winter trees. As I walked past the neighbors' windows, I felt their eyes before I heard them, a quiet, searching weight pressing against me. I didn't turn, but I could sense the mixture of curiosity and pity in their gaze, the silent judgments that travel faster than words. The sun hung low, pale and weak, casting long shadows across the yard. My coat was buttoned tight, scarf wrapped around my neck, yet the chill seemed to seep deeper, brushing against more than skin. I kept my eyes on the ground, counting each step, listening to the crunch of frost beneath my boots, as if it could keep me grounded, could protect me from what the neighbors might be thinking. Their voices were muffled, carried lightly on the winter wind, fragments of conversation I couldn't fully hear. The gossip had begun, I knew it. Though no one knew the full story, the whispers spread like smoke through the empty streets, curling into every corner, settling into the fabric of the town. I could almost hear them muttering, "Did you hear? Poor soul! What a tragedy!" I let them talk, invisible, silent, retreating into myself. I reached the barn, its red paint peeling in places, smell of hay and earth mixing with the cold air. The door creaked under my hand, welcoming and familiar. I stepped inside, letting the routine of chores and animals take hold, a fragile anchor against the weight pressing at my chest. The hay was dry beneath my fingers. The smell of it carried a strange comfort, a reminder of work, of life continuing despite loss. I let the animals nudge my hands, the warmth of their fur a quiet reassurance. Their eyes, clear and unjudging, followed me as I moved from stall to stall, brushing the horses, arranging feed. Here in the barn, the world's gaze couldn't reach me, couldn't pierce the layers of grief I had wrapped around myself. Or so I thought. The letter's words lingered in my mind. Every line pressed against my thoughts like an unspoken accusation, subtle yet unyielding. I traced the handwriting with my memory, hearing her voice in the curves and loops, feeling the weight of what had not been said for so long. Could I hide from the world? Could I hide from the truth that had been laid bare on that single sheet of paper? I paused by the window, looking out at the frost-lined yard, the neighbors' houses in the distance. I could see movement, silhouettes passing behind glass, shadows that spoke of speculation, of concern, of a longing to understand what could not be understood. I pressed my palm against the cool wood of the barn wall, letting it ground me, reminding me that while the world watched, there was still a place untouched, still a space where grief could breathe. The horses shifted, their soft snorts filling the quiet, echoing through the rafters. I moved among them slowly, each motion deliberate, measured, a rhythm born of years of familiarity. The chores took longer than necessary, not out of diligence, but as a shield against the storm of memory and judgment pressing at the edges of my mind. I fed, brushed, swept, stacking hay as if each bale could contain some of the sorrow that weighed on me. I thought of their eyes again, the neighbors, the silent watchers of my life unraveling in ways they would never understand. What could they know of loss so intimate, so precise, so quietly devastating? They would see the aftermath, hear fragments, but the weight, the choice, the ache, would always remain hidden, a secret pressed between the lines of my life. The wind rattled the barn's shutters, sharper now, insistent, reminding me that time and curiosity were relentless. Outside, life moved on in small gestures. A car passing, a dog barking, footsteps in snow, all ordinary, all indifferent to the fracture of my world. I closed my eyes and let the sound settle into me, a reminder that the world spins regardless of grief, regardless of sorrow, regardless of secrets held in tight fists or folded letters. I picked up a piece of hay, twirling it between my fingers, and let my mind wander back to him, to the choices that had brought me here. His laughter, small and bright, seemed to echo faintly through the rafters, a ghost pressing into the present. Could I face the neighbors, their pity, their curiosity, and still stand upright? Could I live with the awareness that they might never know the truth, and yet, that the world demanded acknowledgement of loss anyway? I thought of her, holding him, pleading over the phone, the letter she had written that had finally reached me. The words pressed now against every thought, every motion, every shadow in the barn. Could I reconcile the judgment of others with the private sorrow I carried? Could the letter offer solace, or would it deepen the ache that had already seeped into every corner of my existence? I leaned against the wall, letting my forehead rest against the rough wood, feeling the chill seep into my skin, mingling with the warmth of memory and the ache of absence. The barn smelled of hay, dust, and winter, a scent that carried the weight of years, of routines, of a life continuing amidst grief. I breathed it in, letting it anchor me while the world outside pressed against the windows, insistent and unyielding. I sat on a bale of hay, the letter lying beside me. I traced its edges with my fingers, careful, deliberate, as if the touch could calm the ache within me. The barn, silent but alive with its own memory, seemed to hold me, offering a fragile sanctuary from the world, from whispers, from eyes that watched but never truly saw. The wind shifted again, softening, carrying with it the faint scent of snow and frost. Shadows danced across the barn floor, long and thin, echoing the weight of the letter's words, the absence of him, the silent questions pressed by neighbors' glances. I let the shadows move around me, let them remind me that the world continues, that memory persists, that grief is patient, and that the truth waits for the courage to face it. I rose slowly, brushing the hay from my coat, feeling the chill of the barn air mingle with the warmth of thought. Outside, the neighbors' windows glimmered faintly in the winter light. I didn't turn to look. Their curiosity and pity would remain, but the barn had given me something the world could not. A space to breathe, to consider, to reconcile a grief that could not be shared, yet demanded acknowledgement. I held the letter close, walking toward the barn door, feeling the cold against my fingers. The world waited outside, as it always does, patient, insistent, unaware. And I realized, with a quiet ache, that hiding was no longer possible. The letter, the memories, the neighbors' glances, they all demanded confrontation, demanded acknowledgement, and in their insistence, they offered a single fragile truth. The past is never fully gone, and neither is the path forward. The door creaked open, and winter air rushed in, sharp and clear. I stepped into it slowly, letting the wind press against me, carrying the faint echo of curiosity, pity, and life moving onward. The barn settled behind me, patient, silent, as the world waited for the next step. The morning air was brittle, the kind that nips at cheeks and stiffens fingers before they are truly awake. Frost crunched beneath my boots as I stepped onto the narrow path leading to the clearing, each footfall a sharp punctuation in the quiet of the woods. My breath hung in clouds, drifting and dissolving like smoke, and the world seemed to hold its breath with me. The trees leaned in close, skeletal branches etching themselves against the gray sky. Silence pressed around me, thick and watchful. Even the birds seemed to avoid this place today, leaving only the whisper of wind to accompany me. The letter trembled lightly in my hand, urging me forward, almost daring me to read what I had avoided for so long. The clearing appeared as it always had, a small patch of earth softened by snow and frost, hidden from any wandering eye. I knelt, boots pressing against frozen grass, and saw the uneven mound of soil, dark against the pale whiteness. I remembered the shovelfuls, each one a mix of anguish and duty, each one a finality I could neither undo nor embrace fully. My chest tightened, and I swallowed hard, tasting the bitterness of grief that refused to leave. I traced the rough edges of the mound with gloved fingers, feeling the firmness beneath the surface. He was here, just beneath my hands, though the world above moved on, indifferent. I could almost feel the weight of his small body in my arms again. Hear the soft, unformed sounds he once made, a reminder of the life that had been mine for only a fleeting moment. The letter pressed against my palm. Its paper was thin, delicate, edges curling slightly with age, yet it carried weight heavier than stone. I hesitated, then unfolded it slowly, feeling the ink's subtle ridges under my fingertips. Each word seemed to breathe, to pulse with emotion that I could not yet name. Could I read it aloud? Could I let someone else, even if only the trees and the wind, witness what I had kept buried? I cleared my throat, voice trembling as I spoke softly into the clearing. The words were hers, layered with sorrow and hope, apologies and revelations. My heart ached with every line, and tears fell freely, warm against the frost and cold air. "I never understood fully," I whispered. "I didn't know what you had done, or why." My voice caught, stuttering against the weight of memory. I looked at the mound again, feeling the cold earth beneath my fingers, and I thought of the last goodbye, the way I had shovelful by shovelful pressed the soil down, the silent promise I had made to protect him, to shield him from a world he never truly knew. Could protection and punishment exist in the same gesture? I didn't know. But I had acted, and the earth had kept its secret, just as I had. The wind shifted, rustling dry leaves and brushing the edges of my coat. I closed my eyes and imagined her voice, the voice that had trembled over the phone months ago. She had pleaded, begged, cried, and I had chosen this. My hands rested on the soil now, still, letting the frost press against me as memory and reality collided. Was this forgiveness? Was this accusation? Or simply the quiet weight of truth, undeniable and unrelenting? I began to read the letter aloud more deliberately, letting her words echo into the clearing. Each line carried a weight I had not anticipated, each sentence a revelation I could not ignore. My grief twisted with guilt, hope with despair, memory with longing. The wind picked up slightly, as if the trees themselves were leaning closer to hear, to witness, to hold space for the moment. I thought of his laugh, small and bright, of the way he had pressed his face into my shoulder, of the warmth I could still remember holding in my arms. Those memories, vivid and fragile, pressed against me like the frost underfoot, sharp and impossible to ignore. Could I face the world outside this clearing knowing what I had done, knowing what I had buried along with him? The letter's final lines trembled in my hands, soft and insistent. "I forgive you," it said. My lips parted, and a single breath escaped. Forgiveness, so simple in words, so impossible in reality. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling the pulse of hope mixed with grief, a fragile bridge between past and present, between choice and consequence. Could I carry both? Could I exist in this space between mourning and redemption? The cold pressed harder now, seeping through gloves, coat, and skin, yet I didn't move. I knelt for a long time, hands brushing the frost-covered soil, letting the letter rest beside me, letting the wind carry my whispered words upward. The trees swayed gently, shadows shifting across the clearing, holding the weight of my confession, of her forgiveness, of the son I had loved and lost. I remembered the last shovel of earth, the finality of the act, the way my body had shivered against both cold and sorrow. Now, with her words, with the acknowledgement carried in ink, the act felt both lighter and heavier, a paradox of grief and relief. Could memory and truth coexist without destroying me? I breathed slowly, deliberately, letting the air fill my lungs and calm the ache in my chest. A crow called in the distance, sharp and solitary, its cry cutting through the quiet like a reminder that life persists, indifferent and insistent. I closed my eyes again, letting the sounds and the cold, the letter and the memory, settle together. The clearing was still, patient, holding the secret and the confession alike, as I finally let a quiet sob pass, unguarded, raw, human. I rose slowly, brushing snow and frost from my coat. The letter remained in my hand, a lifeline tethered to the past, the hidden grave, the grief that had become part of me. I glanced once more at the mound, its dark form softened by frost, unchanged yet transformed by acknowledgement, by words, by the act of speaking aloud what had long remained unspoken. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying a promise I could almost believe. That even in absence, even in sorrow, there is a way to honor, to remember, to reconcile. I stepped back from the clearing, boots crunching over frost and fallen leaves, heart heavy yet a little lighter, carrying both grief and forgiveness together, and I knew that the world awaited beyond the trees, but I was not yet afraid to face it. The letter pressed against my chest, warm against the cold, a fragile tether to memory, to love, to loss. I folded it carefully, slipping it into my coat pocket, and walked slowly toward the path that led home, leaving the hidden grave behind, yet carrying it with me always, as I would carry the truth and as I would carry him. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting. I sat in the old armchair by the window, frost edging the glass, watching the weak morning light spill across the floor. The letter lay unopened on my lap, fragile and trembling beneath my fingers. I didn't want to break it, didn't want to disturb what felt sacred and delicate. Outside, the wind paused, or perhaps it never came. The trees were still, shadows stretching thin and long across the yard. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, of the lingering warmth of a house that had held a family and a life now fractured. I traced the edges of the envelope with my thumb, feeling the indentation of her handwriting beneath my skin, a tactile whisper of a voice I had almost forgotten. I drew a slow breath and unfolded the letter, careful not to crease it. The paper smelled faintly of ink and something more, memory perhaps, or time itself. Her words unfolded like a melody I had known once, notes buried under years of silence and avoidance. Each line carried weight, a quiet honesty that reached across the years, brushing against the corners of my grief. She wrote of regret, of mistakes born from fear and misunderstanding, of love that had been steadfast even when hidden behind anger. The words were tender, careful, each one a gentle step toward reconciliation. I felt tears gathering, hot and uninvited, rolling down cold cheeks, tracing the lines of a face that had grown weary with sorrow and sleepless nights. I read aloud softly, voice barely more than a whisper, letting the words settle in the room like a fragile spell. I was afraid, she wrote, and I did not see the depth of what I was risking. I wish I had been braver, that I had trusted more, loved more freely. My chest tightened with every syllable, the weight of unspoken apologies pressing against my ribs. Could a piece of paper carry the substance of a heart? Could ink ever truly bridge the chasm carved by years of distance and silence? The wind shifted suddenly outside, rattling the window pane. It sounded almost like a sigh or a pause, as if the house itself leaned closer to hear, to bear witness. I let my eyes drift over the words, tracing them repeatedly, letting each sentence sink deeper into memory. She wrote of him too, of the boy I had buried in more ways than one, of the life we had all tried to protect, of the choices that had shaped every moment since. I closed my eyes, picturing her voice, trembling yet unwavering. It wove through the quiet of the room, through the frost-strewn glass, through my own thoughts. I could almost hear her sitting across from me, fingers wrapped around the edges of the same paper, heart laid bare. I could feel the years pressing down, heavy and unyielding, yet softened by the delicate honesty of her words. Tears blurred my vision, the warmth mixing with the chill that seemed to seep from the walls. I kept reading aloud, letting the sentences flow between us, between past and present. I wish I could have seen him, she wrote, held him, known him the way you did. I am sorry for the silence, for the absence, for the fear that kept me from being brave enough to try. My voice cracked, trembling over syllables weighted with love and sorrow, but I could not stop. The letter spoke of more than regret. It spoke of hope, of forgiveness offered and acceptance sought. I felt the room expand, the air pressing lighter against my skin, as if her words had opened a small window in the world, letting warmth and light seep through. Could a letter, so fragile and quiet, reach across the years and heal something long thought broken? I did not know. I pressed the paper to my lips, inhaling faintly the scent of ink and memory. My hands shook, not from cold, but from the ache of connection, the sudden recognition that the past was not gone, only layered beneath the weight of years. Her voice had returned to me in the gentlest, most unexpected way, soft and persistent, like wind through bare branches. I read on, voice steadier now, more deliberate. She wrote of fear giving way to clarity, of mistakes acknowledged, of love unhidden at last. The words lingered, carrying the quiet authority of truth. I felt the room hold them, the air suspended, the house listening with a patience I had not noticed before. It was as if every creak of the floor, every whisper of draft, every shadow across the walls bore witness to this bridge being built between us, between her, me, and him. The tears continued to fall, but they felt different now. Less a release of anguish than a recognition of something tender and enduring. Could grief and forgiveness exist side by side? The letter suggested they could, in this small, deliberate, and fragile way. I folded the paper carefully, feeling the words press faintly into my skin, an imprint of a voice that had once been lost but now reached me. The house seemed stiller, warmer somehow, as if it too had absorbed the honesty and hope of her words. Outside, the wind began again, stirring the bare branches, carrying whispers of frost and cold, yet the moment within remained sheltered, a quiet sanctuary where memory and voice met. I set the letter aside on the table, feeling the pulse of connection lingering between us. The past had returned, not as accusation or pain, but as acknowledgement and truth. Could a single piece of paper really bridge years of silence, misunderstanding, and absence? I did not know, but I could feel the fragile tether it offered, a line of light threading through shadowed grief. I let my fingers linger on the envelope, hesitant to break the spell, and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I could hear her voice clearly, not in anger or fear, but in quiet understanding. My chest ached, yes, but it ached with something more, something delicate and vital. The possibility that connection could return even after long absence, that forgiveness could be spoken even across the distance of years. I breathed slowly, deliberately, letting the words settle, the tears dry, the house hold its quiet vigil. The letter remained in reach, a bridge, a voice, a fragile reminder that the past is never fully gone, and that even in absence, hearts can reach each other. Outside, the morning light brightened, touching the frost on the windowpane, glinting across the floorboards. I rose slowly, carrying both the ache and the hope with me. Her words had returned, and with them, a possibility I had thought long buried. The letter lay on the table, a small, steadfast witness to everything I had feared, everything I had hoped, and everything I might yet reconcile. And in that stillness I realized, the past had a voice, and it had finally found me. The fog hung low over the clearing, thick and quiet, softening the edges of the world. I stepped lightly, boots crunching over frost-hardened earth, and the grave lay ahead, small, still, and unyielding, yet somehow less heavy in the first light of dawn. Pale gold spilled across the horizon, brushing the frost-tipped grass, touching the contours of the mound with a gentle warmth. For a fleeting moment, the weight on my chest lifted, though the sorrow remained, lingering in every shiver and whispered breath. I knelt slowly, hands brushing against the cold soil, feeling its firmness, its resistance, and the finality it held. The letter rested in my lap, its edges soft from handling, ink fading slightly in the morning light. I unfolded it once more, reading her words in silence, letting each line settle in the quiet space around me. She wrote of love unspoken, of fears conquered too late, of memories that refused to fade. Even in her absence, I could feel her heart reaching across the distance of years, pulling me gently toward understanding, toward acceptance. The clearing was hushed. A crow passed in the distance, cawing softly, its voice a reminder of the fragile persistence of life. I traced the outline of the mound with my finger, remembering shovelfuls of soil, the final goodbye whispered into frozen air. The memory pressed against me, sharp, heavy, yet softened now by the dawn's quiet light. How had I carried this weight alone for so long? How had I failed to see the enduring presence of love in absence, the tether that could not be broken, even by death? I lifted the letter again, reading aloud softly, letting her voice weave through the mist. Even when I was gone, he was never truly lost, she wrote. And even in your sorrow, you carried the best of him with you. My lips trembled as I spoke, and the words hung in the clearing, drifting across frost and fog. I felt the years compress, the past and present bending together in a delicate, almost fragile alignment. Could love really endure this long, through silence, through mistakes, through absence? Seemed it could. The wind stirred gently, lifting loose strands of my hair, rustling the grass, carrying a faint scent of earth and early sun. I breathed in deeply, chest tightening and loosening in a rhythm I hadn't noticed for years. My eyes scanned the horizon, where the fog began to lift, revealing trees, distant hills, the hint of a world beyond this small clearing. The day was waking slowly, patiently, as though it had been waiting for me to arrive, to see, to understand. I traced the contours of the mound again, fingertips pressing lightly into the frost-hardened soil. Each touch was a conversation, a confession, a remembrance. I whispered his name, first barely audible, then more certain, letting it roll into the air, carrying the weight of longing, of guilt, of love. The sound seemed to linger, settling over the frost and fog like a soft benediction. I had carried silence for so long, and now in the dawn words, her words, my words, were enough to give it shape, enough to let me breathe again. The letter pressed against my palm, fragile yet insistent. I could feel the urgency of her heart in every line, the love that had spanned absence, distance, misunderstanding. It reminded me of what we shared, what we had built, and what endured despite everything. I could see him clearly now, not just in memory but in the folds of her care, in the quiet spaces she had left behind, and in my own embrace of it. The grief remained, yes, but it had softened, settling into a steady, enduring ache that felt almost like respect, for him, for her, for the life we had shared, fleeting though it had been. I let the letter fall to my lap, silent, its words imprinted on my skin and in my mind. The frost beneath my hands was cold, yet grounding, tethering me to the moment, to the reality of loss, and to the beauty of what had been. I brushed my fingers over the soil one last time, making a small motion of care, of reverence, of commitment. I would honor him, not with grand gestures, not with loud declarations, but in quiet remembrance, in the way I carried him forward through each day, through each breath. The sun climbed a little higher, warming the frost, softening the outlines of the world. The fog lifted gradually, revealing the clearing in its entirety, the trees lining its edges, the distant hills welcoming the light. I felt a shift inside me, subtle, imperceptible, yet undeniable. The sorrow remained, yes, but it was no longer crushing. It was tempered now by understanding, by recognition, by the truth that love does not vanish, even in absence, and that memory, carried carefully, can sustain the heart. I rose slowly, brushing frost from my clothes, letting the letter fold naturally in my hands once more. I glanced at the mound, committing its form to memory, feeling the presence of what had been, and what would continue to be in quiet ways. The morning light touched the grass, glinting across frost crystals, highlighting the world beyond the clearing that waited for me, waiting for steps no longer burdened entirely by guilt. A crow cawed again, nearer this time, wings lifting against the lightening sky. I watched it pass, a small pulse of life in the clearing, a reminder that even in stillness, the world persists, and with it, memory and hope. I tucked the letter carefully into my coat pocket, close to my heart, carrying both the ache and the warmth it offered. For the first time in many years, I felt the weight lift just enough to see beyond the sorrow, to glimpse the depth of her love, to understand the life we had shared, even in absence. I could honor him now, quietly, deliberately, fully, and in that acknowledgement I found a fragile peace. The clearing lay before me, light and shadow interwoven, frost glinting faintly, the grave waiting, steady, silent. I took a step forward, then another, letting the dawn lead me, letting memory and love guide each motion. The letter rested in my hand, a bridge between what was lost and what remained, and I realized, it was never too late to honor him, never too late to carry him with me, always. The first full rays of sunlight spread across the clearing, gold and soft, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe freely. The fog receded, revealing not only the world but also the possibility that grief and love could coexist, that memory could nurture rather than haunt, and that a dawn like this could illuminate even the most hidden corners of the heart. And so I stood there, frost beneath my boots, letter in hand, a slow smile pressing faintly against my lips. The sorrow had not vanished, but for the first time it felt like part of something larger, a story of love, loss, and quiet, enduring remembrance. The fog lay thin now, lifting in slow, deliberate folds across the clearing. I knelt by the small mound, cold soil pressed beneath my palms, the earth no longer resisting, just waiting. In my hand, the letter trembled slightly, edges softened from being handled, ink carrying the weight of years. I lowered it gently, placing it beside him, my fingers brushing against the frost like a farewell I had rehearsed in silence. The winter air held its breath, still and sharp, and I whispered into it. Apologies, confessions, and love tangled together in a quiet prayer no one else would hear. The clearing seemed to exhale. Sunlight broke through the lingering fog, washing over frost-tipped grass and warming the mound where he rested. It was not warmth that melted sorrow entirely, but it softened the edges of it, made the ache less jagged. I traced the contours of the earth with my fingers once more, memorizing its cold solidity and the permanence of what I could no longer change. Each breath I drew was heavier and lighter at the same time, weighted with grief, yet buoyed by the small, fragile understanding that had begun to seep through. I lifted my gaze to the horizon. The sky was pale gold, hinting at a day unmarked by tragedy yet shaped by memory. The wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of damp earth and winter air, and for the first time in many weeks, the clearing felt expansive rather than oppressive. The fog that had wrapped the world in silence now receded like a quiet witness, leaving traces of light to illuminate both the soil and my own shadowed heart. I thought of all the moments I had carried in private, the laughter that once filled the house, the tiny hands I would never hold again, the weight of decisions made alone. Each step of my journey had been solitary, and yet, in laying the letter beside him, I felt the faintest connection to her, to him, and to the life we had shared. The words on the page were simple, but they resonated deeply. A bridge across absence, a tether that could not be broken even by loss. I inhaled slowly, feeling frost bite at my nose, the damp chill pressing into my lungs, and I exhaled, letting grief pour out into the clearing. It rolled off me, unseen, yet tangible in the tension I carried in my shoulders and chest. The mound beneath my hands was still, unyielding, yet somehow forgiving. I pressed the letter one last time, a subtle, deliberate gesture, my silent acknowledgement that the past could not be undone, but it could be honored. The sun climbed higher, fingers of light tracing patterns across the frost, warming the ground in gentle swaths. I remained kneeling, letting my thoughts drift, tracing the curves of memory and longing with quiet reverence. The clearing seemed alive with the echoes of what had been. Distant birds calling, the wind brushing through bare branches, the muted rustle of frost melting under the warmth of dawn. Even the silence felt like an answer, a conversation held in the spaces between breaths. I rose slowly, boots crunching on the frost, feeling the weight of grief and understanding settle evenly in my chest. Each movement was deliberate, measured, a ritual of release as much as remembrance. I touched the earth one final time, fingertips pressing lightly into the soil, imprinting my presence, my love, and my sorrow. The letter lay beside him, folded now into quiet permanence, the final words between us echoing softly in the clearing. The path back to the house stretched before me, dusted with frost and light, familiar yet somehow altered by the morning's revelations. Each step felt both tentative and necessary, carrying the fragile hope that life could continue, carrying lessons carved into the cold soil of memory. I glanced back once, at the mound, at the letter, at the place where grief had been transformed into something quieter, steadier. The sun glinted off frost crystals, a small reassurance that even loss could be met with grace. The wind stirred again, brushing across my cheeks, lifting strands of hair, carrying whispers of what had been and what might yet be. I inhaled the scent of winter, of earth, of lingering snow, and exhaled slowly, letting my heart find a rhythm it had long abandoned. The world seemed to shift slightly, softer, less accusing, allowing me to carry both sorrow and understanding without being crushed by either. Inside the house, the silence was different now, not heavy or accusatory, but reflective, carrying the warmth of a life that had endured in memory, in quiet gestures, in love unspoken yet understood. I hung my coat, brushed snow from boots, and moved deliberately through familiar spaces, each object, each shadow, a gentle reminder of what was lost and what remained. I paused in the doorway of the kitchen, light spilling across the floor, and allowed myself a moment to breathe. The letter had done more than offer words. It had offered perspective, connection, a quiet release that had been waiting for years. I realized then that grief could coexist with hope, that memory could sustain rather than suffocate, and that in choosing to honor the past, I had also chosen a path forward. Outside, the clearing lay bathed in sunlight, the fog fully gone, revealing the horizon in crisp detail. The mound rested quietly, letter beside it, a testament to love, loss, and enduring remembrance. I knew I would return, that I would carry this ritual with me always, but for now I stepped back, feeling the fragile, unsteady pulse of life beneath my feet. The winter air remained sharp, but it no longer cut through with accusation. Instead, it pressed softly against my cheeks, carrying the faint promise of mornings yet to come, of days that could be met with cautious hope. I exhaled, letting both sorrow and solace spill from me into the quiet world, a silent prayer to what had been and what might yet be. And as I moved toward the house, boots leaving light prints in frost and soil, I felt the balance shift. Grief and understanding, sorrow and love, memory and quiet hope, all moving with me, steady, unhurried, alive. The sun touched each step I took, and I realized, perhaps for the first time in years, that even after such loss, life could hold a soft, patient chance to heal. I reached the door and paused, hand on the handle, listening to the silence that had transformed into something more like presence than absence. The future stretched before me, unsteady, fragile, yet undeniably open. I stepped inside, carrying both the weight and the release, knowing that in honoring him, I had begun to honor myself. The clearing waited behind me, sunlit and forgiving, the letter and mound still together, a quiet witness to love endured, loss acknowledged, and a dawn that could bring more than grief, a dawn that could carry hope.